All right, so I don't know if it's obvious. Here are we. How clean is the lens here? You see that fog? Now there's a glare. Hey, that works. That's good enough. I think that's slightly better. Okay, so we are getting very close to being able to paint. This is very far along. So you can see he's got the funnel, the dome, safety valve, buffers, handrail, a lot of details that make him look more like Oliver. I caution anybody who's making models of any variety. Sometimes your model is going to look wrong until you add crucial elements. So like you take the dome and the funnel off of this guy and the boiler looks a little too skinny. It looks kind of weird, right? Like it doesn't but really it's just your mind is expecting stuff to be up here. So the engine doesn't look tall enough, but of course it doesn't. It's missing crucial elements. It's the same reason that somebody might wear it's like why people wore top hats back in the day. I assume, it's to kind of accentuate your height, right? And, it just that little bit of difference makes a big deal in the way you perceive an object or a person for that matter. And with Oliver, he looks a lot more correct. I love big domes. Something I've realized, that needs to go down. There we go. Something I've realized working on Oliver is that his class is actually a very antiquated design. It's like something that got revived in the 30s, but it's based on something from the 1800s. And when you look at him, you kind of get that sense. If it was just an open cab, and you look at the wheels here. I mean, that's kind of an outdated wheel arrangement. That's don't let it fool you because the wheels are at the back, but it looks like a, like all the early engines, around the time the Precedent class came out, or whatever immediately preceded Edward. I know those are LMS era, LMS region things, but those are all kind of really old-fashioned engines, and they typically had 4 driving wheels and then 2 kind of, support wheels in the front or the back. Oliver also has a very low-slung boiler, very slim boiler, huge funnel, huge dome, big old safety valve, though that's characteristic of the Great Western Railway. Point being, very old-fashioned design that's just been gussied up enough that we don't think of it that way. This is what I love about building models, is that it gets me thinking about the details in a sense that I wouldn't have otherwise. But look at that. It's pretty good. This really has a scale to it, a feeling that, I think it comes across on camera that this is not, HO's scale. I mean, obviously it doesn't, hello, but, it's, even without context, I think you look at it and you're that's big. And I love that, That's why, in Hollywood movies, they make things to huge scale, right? Shepperton, we think of the Gauge 1 models as big, but that's because it's big compared to Trackmaster, Wooden Railway, or whatever. Models Shepperton used were pretty small when it comes to film. Made sense because the entire cast was engines and the sets had to be huge. But, you think about the Titanic movie, you think about that train crash scene in Hugo in France, you think of those types of things. Those models are 5 times, 10 times bigger than the Gauge 1 models are. So, this is kind of partly inspired by that. It's not that much bigger. It's only, 2.5 inches in terms of gauge, but it's big enough that, if you were to pick it up, you couldn't mistake it for the models from the show. It's big. What else is there? I caution anybody, this is just a very common sense thing. I cut my fingers, and I cut them by grabbing a bit out of here, and I grabbed this one right here, and I grabbed it from the tip with my bare fingers because I was impatient and an idiot and didn't think about it. Probably take a pair of pliers and pull those out, or at least grab them from down here. I'm sure anybody who knows the littlest bit about tools would do that. But I wasn't thinking, and I grabbed that, and that's basically a series of blades in the spiral, and I cut myself. They're not the worst cuts. They don't need stitches, but, you know, I'm just saying, be careful about it. Now, you might be asking, why am I using drill bits at all? Because look at this guy. Like, does he require that? Well, the more astute among you might have noticed the crank pins here that are screws. Those actually don't screw in. I wanted them to, but the holes were I printed the holes too big on the driving wheels, and so now they pop in a very satisfying manner. No, what I actually used it for, and this might blow the minds of people who are used to how I build things, is the buffers are screwed in. Look at that. I'm very proud of that. That's the most tool-oriented thing I've ever done. Like, because I'm so sick of building engines with buffers that like pop right off because they're only glued on. I hate glue. I despise glue. I mean, I'll use it if I have to. There's some applications you really just have to use glue, but if I can avoid it, if I can create a structural connection, I'm going to do that instead. And you know, most of the models I've made, like say the way this cab is held together, it's not the front wall glued to the side wall. It's taped. It's basically a band holding this together all the way along. Same with this to this and this to this. And then to make it look cleaner, I'm masking tape over the side so that you don't see the structural tape. But the way this is kept together, it'd be very hard to pull apart with your bare hands. You could rip it, but you couldn't like easily separate it along the seam. Anyway, so the point being, me screwing in the buffers is a very new phenomenon. It's not something I'd typically do. But I thought, no, why not? And also I had a bunch of screws left over from those shelves I hung over there the other day. I've got this whole huge thing of them, right? So I thought, why not use them? They're very tiny. I ended up cutting off with a very heavy-duty wire cutter the ends of these screws. So they were a lot shorter, and they were able to go straight into this. Buffers aren't glued in right now. They just come out by tension. But, yeah. I could almost make them sprung, but I didn't leave enough room in there. And also, it sounds like a pain, like getting a spring in there without... the whole thing's a nightmare. I don't want to think about that. So I'm not going to do it. But other thing is I've left room in here for internal valve gear, which has actually already been designed. And I bought some red PLA. I have never, ever used colored PLA before for the printer. But I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to make moving parts in there, the last thing I want to do is paint them because they're going to end up wearing down almost immediately. And then you're going to see these ugly white streaks along them, and it would just suck. So I'm going to print them in red and not even have to paint them and put them in there, and they should look good. This isn't done to the highest standard. I mean, I sanded that dome for a while, and even from here, you can still see the grain. But I'm not as dedicated as like some of the HO people who like make a Gordon or something and like putty it and sand it and putty it and sand it. I have endless respect for those people. I just cannot bear it. I don't have the patience to do that myself. And so in a way, I sort of make up for that by building the whole thing from scratch with found materials because I take pride in that element of it. So it's like, there's probably a lot of HO or 00 Olivers that are going to look better than this does when it's done. But this one, and I know I've already stressed this, is huge. He's really big, and he's built genuinely from scratch. Like, you can see, based on the color, how much of it, like, if I snap my fingers and take away all the 3D printed parts, you've still got most of the engine. So, for that reason, that's kind of how I validate it to myself. Most people just make things and they're like, that's cool, and they don't think about the value of them. To me, I do think about the value quite a lot. And so the way I managed to take pride in it, despite it maybe not being of the highest caliber, is the novelty of it. And the fact that, sure, this model may be rough in areas, but there's nothing like it anywhere. I mean, it exists on a gauge that barely exists in the world, So to me, that's where I take pride in it, is the uniqueness of it. And also the fact that it will be a very nice model. I mean, it's, it is going to be quite impressive. It's going to be very good looking. But I'm not worrying about like sanding really effectively and stuff like that. Anyway, so is there anything else? I don't think so. I mean, I've started the running board. This is just going to be a plastic plate that I glue down. Typically, I try to separate those things nowadays. Like, if I made a model back in, say, 2015, I would have, like, taped the tanks to the running board and the running board to, like, it would all be one unit. But now I try to make it more modular because it's easier to paint. So paint this green, this black, and never the twain shall meet until, you glue them together. So yeah, it should work out pretty well. And yeah, I mean, there's probably more I could go into, but you can see it's coming along, and hopefully I'll be able to paint it within the next few days. There's very few parts I still have to make. The splashers, filler caps, the roof, I think are the only other 3 green parts. Because black, it's the same black throughout. I can forget a black part and paint it later. But if I forget a green part, that's gonna suck because I'll have to remix the paint and it won't be quite the same. So I'm trying to make sure I get all the green parts done before I paint anything. But we're getting pretty close. It's just a few parts. Anyway, so I'm at great risk of these videos getting longer every time until they're not manageable anymore, so I better sign off. But this is pretty cool, I think, all things considered. It's a very fun object to mess with. Like, it's so good. Like, I love throwing him around the curves and seeing him not derail. That's very cool to me. All right. Anyway, so without further ado, see you guys soon.